At this time, we're gonna have an open mic. If anyone would like to have something to say about Gary, this is the time that it would be good if you could come up to the front. Just because we're taping it all, so for those who can't be here. Yeah, stick wherever you like. That's good.
I'm not very good at public speaking. Please bear with me. For those who don't know me, I'm Ryan. I first met Gary and Peggy back in 2014 when Gary took a chance on me to guide for them at Ecotours BC. Since then, it's been a privilege to have known Gary, from employer to friend to mentor. I got to share in so many special experiences with him, and so many stories. I'm sure we all know how Gary could capture a room with his great ability to tell a story. Now, I'm no good myself at telling stories, but a couple memories stand out I'd like to share. Witnessing a raven having a partnership with an old deaf grizzly. While on a hike along a river with two guests, this raven confronts us by landing right in front of us having a fit. I was confused, had no idea what was going on. Gary understood what was going on and looked around and pointed out the paw of a grizzly sleeping in a hollowed out stump just feet away. This raven did everything it could to try and alert him to our presence. Gary, of course, knew the bear and explained he's an old deaf bear that's even missing part of his ear. It could be a little grumpy. So with that, we all backed away and the raven calmed down. Thank goodness Gary spotted that bear and that he was deaf. The connection Gary had to wildlife, and especially to the grizzlies, was unmistakable. Gary not only knew individual bears, but who they were related to: siblings, parents, grandparents. On my first fall guiding trip here with Gary up the Mitchell, we spotted a sow and 3 cubs walking the riverbank. Gary lights up and says, "It's Hilda." And she's a bear I've got to know for many years since. Well, as we slowly follow her down the small river, we lose sight of them around a corner. So we beach on the point of a gravel bar and then see Hilda and the 2 cubs, but one is missing. Well, the third, a male, Gary says, with his head down, comes bounding towards us out from the bush and has no idea we are right there in front of him. He lifts his head and sees us and lets out a cry, while Hilda turns around and glares right at us. Our guests, who are just taking pictures, loving the photo opportunity, don't realize we are between the cub and her. Gary, standing next to the boat, just locked eyes with Hilda, and she instantly relaxed, gave a woof, and the cub ran as fast as he could back to Mom, only to get a licking from her. Gary could communicate not only with whispers, but without even saying a word. They trusted him. That moment, I understood why he was the bear whisperer. With all the great memories I have with Gary, what I enjoyed most was when it was just Gary and myself with our dogs, up a mountain, cutting a trail, exploring a new area, getting to hear his stories, soak in his knowledge, and of course, share a few laughs. Gary loved the high country. Hiking the alpine was his favorite. He would always have a big grin on his face up there, just like a big kid, and always wanting to push further to the next ridge, only pausing to look at the view from the top of the mountain and say, "This is God's country." Gary taught me so much: to expect the unexpected, to accept what nature gives you, and not look into the forest, but to see it from within. It's all about perspective. These lessons also apply to day-to-day life, especially over the last few years. I'm so grateful for the time I got to be his friend. I know Gary, with his beloved dogs, Dixie and Trouble, are standing on top of a mountain, looking down at us from God's country.
Oh, yeah.
Very good. Thanks, Ryan. Anyone else? Something about Gary? I got to know him a little bit in the last year and a half. And I'll share maybe a little teeny bit more, but later. But one thing, looking in a kind of a funny sort of way, he was a big Leafs fan. And I saw a Leafs fan yesterday in town. He was an older guy, and he was goofing around with his wife as he was leaving. And so I'm going to talk to this guy. He had a Leafs hat on. I said, "Are you a Leafs fan?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm a Leafs fan. How about you?" And I said, "I'm a Bruins fan." Oh. Anyways, he said, "No, that's not good." I said, "Anyways," I said, "Do you remember 1967, the last time they won the cup?" And he said, "I sure do, and I didn't think it would take this long to get another one." I said, "You're not there yet." And Gary was a Leafs fan, and even if he would have lived another 100 years, I don't think he would. Anyone else?
I knew Gary from Yanks Peak. He used to come up there and park his truck and leave it and quad from there. And a short version of the conversation would be, "Hi, how are you doing? Where's the Bears?" But what I really wanted to say, in theme with what Gary's life was about, can you hear me? Yeah. Is about 20 years ago, the #1 hit song in Germany was about hunting bears in the Caribou. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Anyone else? You do? Okay.
I guess I just have to say my very first experience of meeting Gary and Peggy was when you had a fishing derby. Years ago, we had just moved here and Ed loves to fish, so it was $1,000 for the biggest char and $1,000 for the biggest rainbow. And anyway, the fishing derby was over at 2 p.m. And anyway, at 2 p.m., lo and behold, this boat comes flying into the shore, and it was Alicia Lodge. That's where you were, right? Alicia Lodge? Yeah. Yeah. And anyway, this boat comes flying in, and with this fish, and it was the weirdest looking fish. I'm not a fisherman, but I thought to myself, I don't think that fish is from our lake. Anyway, it was frozen solid. So Gary said, he said, "Well, why didn't you guys bring your fish in before 2? Oh, he said, "We were way up the North Arm and we didn't come all the way down. We thought we'd wait till closing time." Anyway, you guys talking about him being assertive, he would not let that man weigh his fish in. I remember that. I felt so bad. So I don't know whether if he was registering it as a lake trout or a rainbow, but I'm sure that fish was not from our lake. I'm sure he bought it at Save On Foods or something. It just did not look, Peggy, it didn't look like a fish from our lake. No way he wouldn't weigh that fish in. And that was my first meeting of Gary. You must have been there, but I don't remember you then. But that was my first meeting of Gary. And I felt bad because it was a great big fish. And well, I don't know if it was bigger than Ed's fish. I'm not sure. It was a big fish. But anyway, Gary would not let him weigh it in, and Ed won the $1,000. And Peggy, am I remembering right? Nobody registered a rainbow that year. Nobody, because I remember saying if you'd have got a 2-pound rainbow, you would have got $1,000, right? And I was fishing, but anyway, that was my first introduction to Gary.
Great story.
Anyone else?
Got a
What's that?
real short one.
Okay.
When I was 6, Dad put me into hockey and bought me all my gear, got all duded up with my gear, and skated out on the ice, and all the rest of the kids, they had shoulder pads. I didn't have no shoulder pads. And I was like, "Dad, I don't have any shoulder pads." you gotta learn how to take the man. You gotta learn how to body check. When you learn how to do that, then you can have shoulder pads. I got him next year.
Anyone else? That's maybe what Matthew should practice, shoulder pads for a while. Anyone else? Something about Gary?
I spent a lot of time on the river with Gary on, we'd be going opposite directions. We worked together. We were doing fly fishing. Gary was doing the eco tours. And this one day we're heading up the river. We have 4 clients, and Gordy Elliott's our lead guide, and myself are on the boat. Rounded the corner, 4-point buck was charging across the water, and it was kind of weird because this thing was freaked right out. So we didn't pay much attention to it, went around 2 other corners. Now we call it Wolf Corner, right? And there's Gary standing there. We were going past him up to the log jam to work our way down, and he starts waving us over. You know, and he still had, that's the year we bought his rod days. So he has 2 fly fishermen. They're on the water, on the bar, and their eyes are this big. They're just bugging right out. And waving us in, so we stopped, and he said, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me." And he was tying up his boat. And he was waist deep. He was tying on the corner up to the brush. And when you're on the river, you're always looking for the brush moving, see if grizzly's coming in, you have clients out there, whatever. And it's really hard not bringing back all your clients. You just have to tear up the invoice, but. Anyway, Gary's there, and he said, "You wouldn't believe what happened." He said, "I'm tying this boat up, and these guys are just bug-eyed. And they're going, yeah. And as he's tying the boat up, one of the fishermen says, 'Gary, there's a bear coming at you.' And there was a owlie bear, I forget what her, Esther, was there?
Eddie.
Eddie? Addie. Anyway, he figures she's coming to get him. And so he puts his back right against the boat, and it was that 4-point. This 4-point, he said, I could have put both my hands up and touched the 4-point, and this wolf is right at his butt with his mouth open. They hit the water. The wolf sees the guys. The buck goes swimming down the river. The wolf sees the guys and starts clambering up on the log jam on the other side. And I asked him later, I says, "Man, that must have freaked you out." He says, "It did." He says, "I was worried about what the heck those other guys were going to do if I'm dead." Anyway, he was a class act, tougher than nails, and one of my best friends ever.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, I guess it's my time now here I know that Gary would want me to say something about his faith and about what he believed in, and so I will. And don't worry, it's not long. But it is meaningful. I didn't know him too well till we moved back here, and then he approached me, said there was something going on. Anyways, we talked for a while, and we talked quite a bit as time went on. And I knew who he was somewhat, but he's definitely. He said I knew God my whole life, but I kind of tried to stay in front of him, or tried to not get too close, but have a little bit of distance between me and God. And then things changed, and he drew close to God. but if you plan on living in this world for very long, you're gonna wake up some days and go, how are you doing? I'm not doing the best. We've all been there. I'm not doing too well. And so I go over and visit him. And he would never say I'm not doing too well, but it was obvious that he wasn't doing that well. And but he would never say it. And he was a very proud man. And I looked, and he was a hardworking man. He was a strong man. I looked at him, and as he was beginning to fade, I couldn't help but think about myself and how he's handling it. How would I handle it? But he knew his faith, and he knew who God was. He truly did. He told me, Marty, people say, and he said, I believe this too, about the bear whisperer thing. And he said, I don't even know if Peggy, you heard him say this, and I don't want to drown out or cut down anything about the bear whisperer because I believe he was too. But he said, you know what? God spoke to me and said, you're not really the bear whisperer. Every time that you come out, and he said, I thought I was, because it seemed to work. But then he said, God told me, I have to watch out for you. You're not really the bear whisperer. I'm always watching out for you. But in Psalms, I think it's 57, there's this guy who's supposed to be king. And it's King David. He's not king yet, but he's running from the king, Saul. And he says that God will fulfill his purpose in me. It's not about us fulfilling the purpose. It's God fulfilling his purpose in me. And so I never got to say this to Gary, but I can say it to you guys that how do you even find your purpose? You serve. And so he wanted to serve, and he wanted to serve, as we heard it. He served. And so when you serve in your purpose, God will do his part in the promise. And so he was a bear whisperer because Gary was serving and he was maximizing the skills that God gave him. And you don't have to maximize somebody else's skills, you maximize your skills. And so he was doing that, and he was the bear whisperer because God was there with him. So Gary was a strong guy, and this is just a short little thing. Is there anybody in the Bible that would kind of be a little bit like Gary? And I would say that it was a guy that was once named Saul. And it's funny, when God meets you and changes you, sometimes he changes your name, and he became Paul. He was a man that he finished up in 2 Timothy 4. He talks about he's dying. He's in jail. He's writing to Timothy, and he's just writing to him and trying to encourage him as he's dying. And he says that I've fought the good fight, and I have been faithful. And I think that that's something that Gary has done as well. Paul, why I chose him to talk about for a second, is this. So I'll just read it here, if I can find it. It's in 2 Corinthians. This is who Paul was. And I think that Gary probably could fit into this. So he said, what else? So see, this is what happened. Saul, his name used to be Saul, and he used to persecute the church. That was what he did. There was a guy that was named Stephen who was stoned. Well, he held the coats. This Paul guy we're talking about, he held the coats of those who stoned Stephen. So he persecuted the church, but one day he was out to arrest more churches, but God arrested his heart and changed him. And he remained zealous, but he remained zealous for the church, not for what he was zealous before. And so he talks here, he said, and this is reminds me of a tough dude in the Bible. So what anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? Well, so am I. Are they Israelites? Yep, so am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? Yep, so am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, have been exposed to death and death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea, and I've been constantly on the move. And I've been in danger from rivers, and in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, and in danger from the Gentiles, in danger from the city, in danger from the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. And I have labored and toiled, and I have often gone without sleep. And I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food, and I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all of these churches. Who is weak? And I do not feel weak. Who is led into sin? And I do not inwardly burn. So this guy knew how to handle it. And I believe that Gary knew how to handle it. He truly did. Like, that's one of the few guys I know. He knew how to handle it. And he was, when you're close to God, like Paul was, and he was ready to die, he knew it. But when you are close to God, you know when it's time. And he pushed and he fought for his new love, who was Christ, who met him on the road to Damascus and gave him a new name and gave him a new life. He pushed and he fought for what he believed in. What are we fighting for these days? What are we fighting for? I think we can think about what we're fighting for, and I don't know if eternally, what are we fighting for? Paul knew how, he talked about his life in a nutshell as almost like a race. And that's what he said, I run the race, but he finished. He said, I have finished the race. I have finished. And so we start a lot of things in our lives, but how many things do we finish? I started a diet. I didn't finish it. It finished me. I started to clean the garage. Then I gave up. I started to learn Spanish. I gave up. I started to do this, but he said, we have to be more. And I think Gary was a guy that started something and he finished it.
Amen.
He started something and he finished it. That's who, and so I liken this Paul character to somebody that Gary could have been a good friend with, because they both had tough goes, but they both were giving. And through all of this, he's still talking about the church. Through all of this stuff that he's went through, he's still concerned about others. So, as we walk in this world and we travel through this world, there was three kids, and they were all going to try to make a straight line and see who could make the straightest line. And so the first kid, he starts walking, it's in the snow, and he starts walking, and he's like looking at his tracks behind, and he's trying to make the straight line. And so as he gets to where he's supposed to go, he looks back, and so the line is crooked a little bit. And then the second boy's like, I'm going to do better than that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just keep my head down and look at my feet, and I'm just going to go like this, and I think I can make a pretty straight line. So he got to where he was going to go, and the line was still kind of wavy. It wasn't crooked, but it was wavy. And then the third kid said, I'm going to look at that tree. I'm just going to walk, and I'm going to keep my eyes on that tree, and that's how I'm going to walk. And his line was pretty darn straight. And so that is with us. If you're a believer in Christ, you look to the tree of Calvary, and you look to what Christ did. And I said something about David, King David. He said that God will fulfill his purpose in me, but yet we like to fulfill our own purposes. And a long time ago, as Christ was ready to go to the cross, there was another disciple, and he wanted to fulfill his own purpose. And he got angry, and he said, Jesus, you're not going to go to the cross. We're going to have our own kingdom here on earth, and it's going to be good. And he pulled out a sword, and he cut off Malchus' ear. And Jesus said, you know what? It's not done like that. You're walking out of the process. You got to stand in the process. You don't do it like this. You don't do it pointing. You do it like this. With hands, with arms upright. And I know that Gary wants every one of you to hear that. I've had some good talks with him, and he was very on fire for God. I don't know if everyone knows that, but he knew God, and God was working in him greatly. He told me some other stuff one day. I'll see if I can do them, but not right now. So I'm going to close with this. It was a young guy that wanted a tree. He wanted this tree to last for a long time. So he went, this must be a city story. He went to the store to buy a tree. So it must be the city. He bought this tree and he said, well, you know, I gotta have a tree that's gonna last a long time. So the guy said, okay, this is the tree you want. It's an evergreen, and you're gonna plant it close to this little brook, kind of a river. It's just something in between. We talked about rivers a lot, so we're gonna call it a river. So this tree was planted by the river, and the guy was very proud, and the tree was beautiful, but then he went out every once in a while, and he would look at this tree, and all of a sudden it started to turn brown a little bit. And he was like concerned about it. Was like, maybe it'll get better, maybe, you know, and then it kind of stayed brown for a while, and then all of a sudden it got browner and browner and browner until it was fully brown. And he went back to the store and he said, this tree that you gave me that was supposed to last for a long time is dead. I planted it by the water, I planted it by the river, but it's dead. And so the guy was like, well, this can't be real. So anyways, he came over and he looked at this tree, and sure enough, it was brown, but he said, let me cross this river, let me go on the other side. So he goes and he walks through. It's not a very deep river, it's not a very deep creek. He goes across and he says, all of a sudden he could see roots coming up on the other side. And he said, it's over here. It's not dead, it's alive, but it's just on the other side of the river. So it is with Gary. For the last 7 years, he has fought cancer. He got a little brown. The tree didn't have all of its green, but he fought. He fought, and the Lord touched him greatly. And then all of a sudden, he went completely brown and he passed away. But you know what? He isn't. He's alive on the other side of the river. And so, Gary, sleep well, and we'll see you in the morning. Good job, faithful one. Thank you.
Amen.
At this time, we're going to have a song, and then I will close in prayer.
Every Sunday, Gary came early to church, and he would sit in the back pew there, and he'd listen to us practice. And he'd just sit there, and we could tell he enjoyed it. And we'd all look at him, and he'd do this. So we are honored as our worship team to end this service with this song.
What do you have, friend, in this world below? What kind of treasures do you have to show?
sign it, it's right up there, you can sign it on the way out. And also downstairs, there's some food and some fellowship, some hanging out. We'd love for you guys to stay. Here's the grannies that play bingo. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you that we serve the God of full supply and we serve the God of no more. No more pain, no more cancer, no more medicine, no more of that. But Lord, we serve now, Gary serves now a God that is everything, stuff that no man has seen yet, he is seeing. We thank you for taking care of the things that we cannot take care of. And you've made a home for each one of us that is waiting for us. Lord, may we come to you and believe what you have done for us on the cross and set us free. In a world that is full of hang-ups, you have your arms wide open for each one of us. Nothing that we have done will ever surprise you. You are never surprised by our shortfalls, and we thank you for that. Thank you for saving Gary and his family. Thank you for using him. Thank you for him fulfilling, serving in his purpose as you fulfilled the purpose in him. Pray that you would be with the family, you would bless them and touch them. Give them that peace that comes from heaven, that no one can take from here on earth, that only comes from heaven. You are a great God all the time, and I thank you for the chance to get to know him, and I thank you for all of these people here and that chance. And Lord, may it not just be a memory, but may he live on in each one of us the way he lived. May we stand up and be taken noted for. We love you and worship you. In your precious name we ask, amen.